Paris, let's get started. We're on day 221. Every time I see this number, by the way, I'm like, the number just is like mind-boggling that we're so far into this revolution, yet still so far away from the resolution, which we'll get to in a little bit. You had some notes that you wanted to kind of talk about, but in the last 24 hours, there's been some quote-unquote breaking news. These kind of things don't really happen in Iran. At least it's not publicized. There was an assassination. I know that some details are still kind of murky. What can you tell us about that? And then we'll jump into the other things that I know you wanted to talk about.
So Abbas Ali Soleimani has been assassinated. He is a powerful cleric in the Islamic regime. And how powerful? Essentially, he was the representative for the supreme leader himself. So he was a big deal guy. He walks into a bank, and according to the video footage that we're being shown, is that somebody in the bank had a gun and shot him. So look, that's the news. But the way, first of all, we have to understand that the Islamic regime is the only source of information in this, and they have footage of the shooting, and they also have the footage of him being brought out, fully covered. Like, it's a very controlled way of portraying it. And all of the foreign press is covering this as well, but they're covering it from the information that the Islamic regime is sharing. So it's not that I'm saying to take it with a grain of salt in the sense that it didn't happen. Obviously it did. Obviously he's a recognized person, but we also have to understand is that there has to be, for the Islamic regime, for something like this to happen, it can't be just random, especially considering who he was amongst the religious clerics. Like he was not only respected, but he did conduct prayers on Fridays. He is somebody that everybody not only listened to but revered. I mean, the person who represents the supreme leader, he's just not, this is not just a random shooting, and it couldn't have just happened randomly. So in a state where so many things happen, so many assassination attempts, so many people get killed and no one knows what happens, all of a sudden this really important guy not only gets shot in a bank, in a public place, on camera, but there's footage and there was cameras available the moment that they brought him out. We really have to see what kind of message is being driven home. We also have to see, did this guy behind the scenes go against what the supreme leader was saying? So this was a setup. So please, like, I know that you wanted to discuss this. It's not that I'm on the fence to discuss it, but we don't have the full story of what really happened. And in a state like the Islamic regime where somebody dies and they're like, they will find anybody to, like Kian Pirfa-like situation, for example, where they have just randomly gotten some people, detained them and accused them of a crime. All of a sudden they've got the perfect crime with the video and trying to make it pass like, oh, here is an assassination attempt and it's an unstable state and even our highest clerics are getting attacked and, you know, maybe Israel is behind it. Like, who knows what they're building. So this isn't just a random story. There's a bigger story behind it that was trying to be portrayed. And it's just really crazy how Western media got all the information immediately available to them. So I'm going to digress, but it's an ongoing story.
I do want to pause for a second, actually. And I want to talk to the viewers real quick. And I want you guys to know how much you should all appreciate Paris. Because, you know, ahead of each episode, you know, I obviously get to review the headlines that Paris wants to talk about. And if anybody's following what's happening in Iran, this was a big news since last night. So I noticed that it wasn't there. And I asked Paris, like, are we going to talk about this? And now you kind of got like an insider's knowledge of like what is going on in Paris's head when she sees this type of news. And she wants to make sure that she's doing all the digging, all the research that you got to do behind the scenes, so that she's not misinforming or just kind of jumping on the train that the Islamic Republic might want you to kind of jump on, you know. So thank you so much for kind of giving us a little background on how you're viewing this, and hopefully in the next week or two you have some updates on what is definitely big news, but still to be determined as far as like what's the agenda essentially. So let's go ahead and go with the first update, which was we're seeing strikes across Iran. Which sector is it affecting?
So essentially started with the oil sector. And again, I'm looking to the notes on the side. I want to make sure that I'm getting all of the accurate information and, you know, mentioning it correctly. So they're asking for wage raises, but what's happening right now in Iran is that obviously, just like any other nation, they're trying to do their best by raising salaries, but the salary raise and is really never even in North America, it's not parallel with inflation, but in the Islamic Republic right now, the inflation is at over 50% and they want to raise it by 27%, but they haven't paid their workers since November. The workers are also saying that it's unsafe working conditions as well. And the other thing they're saying is that these petroleum companies are making deals with outside entities in euros or in American dollars, but for the Iranian worker, this does not translate. They're getting paid in rials, which is literally pennies on the dollar for what the company is making. So that is some of the protests that's going on nationally. As well, there are teachers on strike. So there's essentially strikes happening all over. But right now, it's really the oil workers. There's also Iran Wire, which is a news outlet, and I'm going to quote them. They're saying that the Council for Organizing Protests of Oil and Gas Contract Workers, they're saying 30 companies in oil and gas are being affected, as well as refineries, mines, and steel factories. They're now also being hit by strikes. The estimate is that 100,000 workers are currently on strike. And the article also refers to a source that says the strikes caused massive losses to the owners of the affected projects, which are controlled mainly by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corp and military institutions and government-related organizations. So this hits the pockets of the IRGC, but at the same time, we know that there are Middle Eastern entities, Middle Eastern countries like Qatar, for example, that have backdoor deals with the Islamic regime and that continue funding. Technically, these strikes should bring a nation to a standstill, but because there are other nations that are supporting the Islamic regime, it doesn't have the immediate effect that it should.
The European Union, the United States, and the UK have imposed restrictive measures on members of the IRGC. Is this round of sanctions different from the others that we've seen so far?
So they're targeting more individuals, Imanju, and just let's keep targeting these individuals, which are tens of thousands of people. So instead of listing the entire IRGC as a terrorist organization, they're just going to grow person by person, group by group. So we might be at it for decades to come if they're going to keep going it this way. So 8 individuals, and Ariantel, which is an Iranian mobile service provider. This is the cell phone provider that is accused of having helped the Islamic regime silencing dissent and protest. So other than that, the new listings include lawmakers, IRGC members, and the IRGC Cooperative Foundation, and that's the body responsible for managing the IRGC's investment. So it just begs the question, what is taking these countries like the EU and Canada and the US so long? Like, the body responsible for managing the IRGC's investments. We know that the IRGC is part of criminal activity worldwide. Why is it taking you 7 months to list them? Like, when you think, I'm sure in 2 weeks I'm going to have new people added to the list. So it just begs the question, why so long? Why it seems like everyone is, by everyone, I mean Western nations, are buying time to see how they could pretty much make deals with the Islamic regime. But I'm turning this into an editorial, so I'm going to stop.
I mean, unfortunately, at this point of the revolution, most Iranians, they know the answer to it, and it's sad. It's the fact that they don't want this regime out of here. So yeah, they're dragging their feet, they're kicking the can down the curb, and that's why we are where we are. So, which is why we have to continue amplifying the voices of the ones in Iran that are fighting, so that that's our part here. So appreciate everyone's watching. You're part of this thing. Let's continue to amplify. Another week and more news about school poisoning. It's like a never-ending nightmare.
Absolutely. Several schools in Sanandaj were under attack. So for those who are not aware, since November, there have been over 250 schools that have been, basically gas has been released in these schools. The Islamic regime says it's arrested a bunch of people in connection with these crimes, but they have no idea what's going on, even though they seem to be coordinated, seem to be happening in similar cities at the same time and in the same region at the same time for a long period of time. and the people who have access to these pipes and these pipelines are, you know, you can't be nothing other than a government official, but they still haven't tracked down who is doing this and why it's happening, even though they said that they have. So on Monday, schools were attacked in Hamadan, in Mershah, and in Karaj as well. It's unconfirmed how many were taken to hospital in those attacks. Iran International is saying that the Coordination Council of Iranian Teachers Association, they've also issued a statement stressing the necessity to form a grassroots organization to help these students out. They even talked about forming human chains around schools. Now, this is a really great idea, but I don't know what this association is thinking. The gas is being released inside schools, within pipelines. I don't know why they're thinking forming a human chain. Maybe that'll be a really great representation of what they're trying to do. Maybe we can duplicate it. But again, if you're hearing about human chains around schools in Iran, this is what it's rooted as. The official information, by the way, coming out of the school poisonings are coming from people who are brave enough to share these stories. You have to understand, the parents who are sharing these stories can be attacked, can be basically told, we will not take your child as a student anymore. So truly, when the stories are coming out and the film is being shared, it's individuals who are putting their lives on the line. If you do share, please blur their faces, but please don't let that hinder you sharing their stories. We absolutely must continue talking about this.
And looks like the regime is once again helping Russia in its war against Ukraine. What's the news about that?
Yeah. So the Wall Street Journal and the Jerusalem Post are both reporting that the Islamic regime has shipped over 300,000 artillery shells and a million rounds of ammunition to Russia across the Caspian Sea. And they've been doing this over the past 6 months. And they do it via cargo flights. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. And cargo flights, according to the Wall Street Journal, make it very difficult for Western countries to block these shipments of weapons. And basically, this would require the agreement of former Soviet republics in the area, which they don't have. So this is a way for the Islamic regime to get money to basically fund its own terrorist attack while funding Russia in the process. But meanwhile, the United States has been trying to help Ukraine in this process, is also trying to make a deal with the Islamic regime. I can't help anyone make sense of this, unfortunately, but it is what it is.
Apparently there's like a gruesome report from the Human Rights Watch that's confirming the worst. What is the worst?
So I want to give a trigger warning for this next portion. As we know, individuals who are arrested by whether they're Basijis or IRGC or undercover police, they are subject to brutal treatment, but this goes further. So please, there's a warning. I'm going to talk about violence and abuse in this short segment. So according to Human Rights Watch, they have been able to confirm. And the reason it's important, we Iranians know that this has happened for 4 decades, but for Human Rights Watch to actually confirm this, as you know, a lot of Western countries want some kind of confirmation that the abuse is happening. Well, they've got it. Human Rights Watch is confirming that security forces torture, kill, and abuse children that are unlawfully arrested, some that are under 10 years old even. They're saying, and I'm quoting here, Iranian authorities have arrested, interrogated, prosecuted children in violation of legal safeguards, and judges have barred children's families from hiring lawyers of their choice to defend them. Convicted children, basically, sometimes it's super big charges. Sometimes children are arrested because it is believed that they're family members of theirs is wanted by the Islamic regime, or family members of theirs protested. So they're essentially used as bait. It's a gruesome report. Honestly, if anybody reads it, please, they didn't put a trigger warning at the top, but I'm just letting you know it's horrifying descriptions of what they do to these children to extract information from them. And sexual abuse is not limited to girls. So again, warning for that. But again, if you speak to anyone and they're telling you, well, there's no proof and this news is coming out of Iran and it's unsubstantiated, well, you can now tell them Human Rights Watch has confirmed, they have spoken with families and they do have proof that this abuse is happening to children, which is a violation, as we know, by international human rights standards.
I wish I would do less watching and more doing something about it, but I guess it is one step forward, the right direction.
Dr. Sam here says, UNICEF, where are you at? Please, louder, Dr.
Yeah.
Sam, louder.
If UNICEF was going to do anything, they've had 7 months to do so. Updates, we only have like 3 minutes to go, so we got to go quickly. Updates about protesters and detainees?
Yes. So Katayun Riahi and Pantea Bahram, they are actresses or well-known actresses in Iran. The Islamic regime has opened files against them. So as we know, they have targeted well-known figures, previously arrested them and released them. Well, there's warnings for those individuals. And in case you missed it last week, Dr. Hamid Qare Hassanlu, he was an individual who was arrested after Hadith Najafi's funeral and accused of basically helping kill a Basij soldier. He was basically given the death penalty. It was overturned, and now he's been given 15 years, which is still absolutely ridiculous for somebody who did absolutely nothing and who's been wrongfully accused. And we mentioned them weekly. Jamshid Sharmad, he is definitely unfairly been put on trial and convicted. We don't know what his status is, but if you follow the hashtag Save Sharmad, you'll get updates via his daughter. So those were the main ones I want to highlight this week. But if you go to previous episodes of Countdown to Freedom for Iran, there's longer lists. We don't want to ignore anyone or forget anyone. The list is long, we do recognize, but the time is short, unfortunately, in this broadcast.
Of course. Thank you. Real quick, what are the action items this week, hashtags, and what should we be following?
The hashtag is hashtag IRGC terrorists, as you heard at the beginning of this news segment. The EU is still just going bit by bit. There are movements to help or to convince countries to name the IRGC as a terrorist organization. But until then, we really have to keep the numbers high on this hashtag, IRGC terrorist. And of course, Tumash Salehi, Saman Yassin, and Mahsa Amini and Iran Revolution.
Final message to our listeners. Anything new?
Nothing new. Just we're going to keep at it to remind everyone that our language is called Persian. It's not called Farsi. و وقتی که به فارسی حرف میزنیم میگیم زبان اون فارسیه، ولی هیچ وقت به فارسی نمیگیم ما انگلیش حرف میزنیم، میگیم ما انگلیسی حرف میزنیم، همونطوری که میگیم ما فارسی حرف میزنیم. And when we speak in English, we say we speak English, we speak Persian. That's the name of our language when we speak in English.
Excellent. Thank you as always. We appreciate you. خسته نباشید.
مرسی.
شب امید آزادی. قربان. مرسی.